want to thank you all for inviting me back to New Jersey. Thank you. And now we need continued help. It wasn't mentioned, Peter didn't mention my intro, but I spent 5 very good years here working at Rutgers and teaching law, including litigating some public access cases. I know that's controversial, for the New Jersey Supreme Court. So I'm well aware of the intensity to which New Jerseyans think about land use decisions in the state. I'm here today to talk about really hidden infrastructure. We, as Peter mentioned, we have 6,000 employees. We serve 9 million New Yorkers, so that's half the state, 8.5 million folks in New York City, and 1 million upstate customers for water, and on the wastewater side, of course, it's limited to New York City. Without water, we just can't have development. So that's our basic pitch, and a lot of our infrastructure you don't see, but if it's missing, you certainly notice it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the watershed. I want to talk about the sort of vexing issues we have on the wastewater front. But as Michael mentioned, we have a 2,000 square mile watershed, actually 2 separate watersheds, one east of Hudson, the old 1840 system, and the newer system really acquired in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And all told, that has allowed us to have a very dependable, clean, award-winning source of water, abundant water, and even more abundant as we see usage decline in city at about 1.5% to 2% a year. And I do think it's something for this group and your colleagues in New York State to think about. As a region, we have a competitive advantage, and that's water. The rest of the country is struggling with drought. Denver Water has a 63% capacity. They're looking at restrictions. Right now, and I get daily reports, we're at about 92% capacity in our 580 billion gallon system. So we have a 2-year supply, and we're very comfortable with that. It's a competitive advantage to the region, and we should take advantage of it. When I left Rutgers to join Mayor Bloomberg's administration, it was a very exciting time. This was in 2007. The mayor had just published Plan YC, the sustainability plan, and the issues that gave rise to that plan were many of the same issues facing New Jersey today, which were New York City. A revival of the city had population had hit a low point in the late 70s, early 80s, and had population had continued to grow. And they were figuring out how they were going to shoehorn 1 million more people that were then and still are expected to move to New York City by 2030. And that's the equivalent of Miami and Boston shoehorned into an existing older city. How do you do it, and how do you do it in a sustainable way? That were many of the struggles we had to deal with. So that was sort of a background fact. But of course, one of the more immediate drivers for sustainability is climate change and the impacts of it. This is a shot of Rockaway Beach on October 29th of this year, the night of the storm, right before it's still daylight, so it wasn't quite high tide yet. And you can see that incredible storm surge. Measured at the Battery in southern Manhattan, it was almost hit 14 feet, and that's 4 feet over the historical record. It was a 1 in 500 year storm, at least, and it had an incredible effect. Obviously, led to widespread destruction. So you can see in the upper left, that's a picture of Manhattan. South of 38th Street, there was just no power. And you can see that little pocket of Battery Park City was serviced by the Farragut network in downtown Brooklyn. That's why it had power, but that's a substantial outage. All told, 800,000 customers, which in electric utility speak means about as many millions of individuals were without power at some point. Obviously, widespread flooding. In the lower left, that's a picture of Breezy Point when seawater hit electrical service, and it was whipped by 60-mile-an-hour winds, 100 homes burned. It was not for lack of water that it wasn't put out. We did have adequate water, and that's one of the success stories that New York City Department of Environmental Protection we're very proud of. We had adequate water throughout, and it was really due to, and I'll get back to this, the investments made in our infrastructure over 100 years ago. The subway system obviously was very well affected, and this is very heavily affected, I should say. They wouldn't call it well, but the commuter line was shut down. That prompted our mayor, for the second time in 14 months, to order an evacuation of our Zone A, which encompasses 375,000 people. Not enough left, unfortunately. We had 43 people die in New York City. We have 760 buildings that are basically uninhabitable, and we're red tagged, and another 7,000 that need major work. So it's a big effect. 7 subway tunnels under the East River flooded. The Brooklyn Battery Tunnel was flooded from end to end. Even the Queens Midtown Tunnel took on water. The Whitehall Station, which many of you may use in southern Manhattan, was completely flooded out, buried under 80 feet of water, and that was a just completed $500 million renovation, so they have to start over again. For our part, on the wastewater system, I said water wasn't affected, but we have 96 pump stations, 42 were affected to some degree. We're rebuilding between 8 and 12 completely. The rest need major electrical work. 10 of our 14 treatment plants were flooded out and affected. We have one on the Rockaway Peninsula, thankfully our smallest one, which obviously bore a lot of the impact. But I'm proud to say that we, due to the dedication of our staff and our preparation, we were able to treat 99% of our wastewater within 3 days. So we were able to get back on our feet very quickly. But here's one reason why we need to think about, and this is a big issue in New Jersey, I know from my past life, in New York City as well. We've built out here, but these are our historic wetlands in the area. And decisions about where to build and how to build have to be informed by our history, because, look at that, it's pretty much complete overlap with the areas that were flooded by Sandy, which I mentioned was a 1 in 500 year storm. All of the Rockaway Peninsula, of course, but major parts of Coney Island, Garrettson Beach, Staten Island were flooded, and you can see it at overwhelmed really the old, now look at this is 1983 FEMA maps, as Secretary Donovan mentioned. New maps are out, which have a great, encompass a lot of areas, including the new World Trade Center site. So we're thinking quickly and deeply about what to do with this. But it was in excess of the 500-year flood zone in New York City. Well, as we think about rebuilding, you know, obviously where we build and how, and we are certainly, our building code is being looked at now. There's certainly going to be elevation of critical equipment and the like in structures. There's also going to be more homes like Cape Hatteras that are on stilts in the V zone, which is the high wave zone. But when we think about rebuilding, we have to avoid what a group out of Harvard, the Zofnass Group for Sustainable Infrastructure, calls the resource trap. And we at New York City DP are well aware of it. You heard Michael's numbers in the future, nearly 34 billion in New Jersey for the water systems. Well, in New York City alone, we're about half the state, I said, in terms of on the drinking water side. In the last 10 years, we've spent $20 billion. And our capital plan for the next 10 years is about $14 billion. It's a lot of money. And unfortunately, in the past, one thing to think about when you try to avoid the resource trap, and I wish I could say we've avoided it, we're trying our best to dig our way out of it, is the role of mandates. We have been forced to spend over the last 10 years over 2/3 of our capital budget due to mandates. And it's a limited pot, of course. What suffers as a result of that? Well, what suffers as a result of that are building out sewers, replacing 100-year infrastructure and the like. And we're looking forward to getting back to that order of business over the next 10 years if we can keep our mandates low. And it's something to think about when you develop a holistic plan, and until utilities do that, they're going to be at the mercy of folks who think that they have a better way to spend their money. But it is all ratepayer spent. And so I want to put this out there. In the heyday of the Clean Water Act, we had a massive federal grant program. Of the money, the high sums that I mentioned, much less than 1% came in the form of grants from the federal government. So, and that was really the stimulus funds. Even looking forward, the Sandy affected areas, which are, some areas in Connecticut, but largely in New Jersey and New York, on the clean water side, have $500 million to split. And that doesn't go far. When you think about PVSC, all the damage that's suffered, we obviously suffered a lot of damage as well. You think about Bays Park in Nassau County, which was down for a significant amount of time. These are some massive wastewater treatment plants, and $500 million is going to go very, very quickly. So largely it's a ratepayer story. You can see the red line here is our debt service. We're at a $1.6 billion a year out of roughly a $3.2 billion budget dedicated to debt service. So we have to think of ways to do it smarter. And here's one reason why, which is because of new facilities coming on board. Our old system was largely gravity fed on the water side. Increasingly, as we add pollution control technologies under current technology, it's energy intensive. Our electricity use is expected to increase 44% over the next few years. The UV facility is the largest UV facility in the world. We're going to cut the ribbon on that this spring, and that's treating the water from our bigger Catskill, Delaware system. Croton filtration plant, we're building at a park in the Bronx, and that's treating our old Croton system, first developed in the 1840s. That requires a lot of energy, and this is the wrong direction from where the mayor has told us to go, which is to decrease our carbon footprint by 30% by 2017. It's going to be hard for us to hit that. All told, the city has decreased its carbon footprint by 16% compared to a 2005 baseline, which is impressive progress, and is due to a lot of innovation on the transportation side, also in the energy mix. But the lesson, I guess, the takeaway from this slide is that when we rebuild, we have to think holistically. We can no longer afford having the water silo and the air silo, because as you can see, if you squeeze one part of the balloon, the other part will go up unless you're thinking smartly. Well, we can look into the past for a little inspiration. One is the sort of first version of sustainable infrastructure, 1.0 as I call it. The picture on the left is our cut and cover Catskill Aqueduct built between 1907 and 1917, largely gravity fed. So again, that water is driven not by pumps, but by gravity from about 1,200 foot elevation to our distributing reservoir just north of the city at 300 feet, and from there to the city. Obviously, we used a lot of sustainable, locally sourced materials built to last so that they can be revamped at very low cost. A lot of very highly skilled artisan labor from Italy, actually. Built what's here is Kensico Dam. So those are things to think about. And our industry going forward is starting to think about sustainable infrastructure. I mentioned Plan YC, the mayor's plan. Now in its second iteration, it gets refreshed every 4 years. Envision is a very new but very exciting rating system, similar to LEED for those of you who are familiar with residential construction. This is to fill the gap on the infrastructure side. How do we make sure that road, bridges, water systems are sustainable? And a group out of Harvard School of Design called the Zofnass Group has gotten together with the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure and published these guides. Envision, it's now in its second version. And finally, our industry, the wastewater industry side in particular, has published our blueprint for action for the utility of the future. And the basic conception here is we can no longer afford single-purpose wastewater treatment plants, for example. We have to look at them as resource recovery. So we, along with really following the lead of other utilities throughout the country, are starting to think about how do we more completely capture our methane. For decades, we've reused digester gas, power our plant. It's great, it's sustainable. We know that waste stream is going to keep coming to us, but can we export it to the network? And the answer is, we think so. We are working in New York State with our New York State Public Service Commission to have a pilot project with National Grid, our local gas supplier, to not only capture methane and use it in our plants, but pump it into the network power, in that case, on a pilot scale, 2,400 homes. Well, on the wastewater side, let's focus on that a little bit. This is the current approach, which we call gray, reflecting the amount of concrete that we have to use. We have spent on the wastewater side alone about half our budget over the last 10 years, or $10 billion, including major upgrades at our largest wastewater treatment plant. You can see the digester eggs, which are going to produce all that nice methane on the left. Also, combined sewer overflow is a big problem in New York City as well, our #1 water quality concern. This is the old approach. This is a big $400 million, 50 million gallon capacity plant that we built and opened in the Jamaica Bay watershed. It stores wastewater, storm passes, gets pumped to the plants, can get treated. That's great. It happens about 50 times a year. It has improved water quality, but 300 days a year it sits idle, and I don't like paying for that, certainly, and my ratepayers don't like paying for it either. We think there's a smarter approach, and happening in conjunction with gray, because you know, our first generation of gray infrastructure is very cost effective on a dollar per gallon basis. As we look forward to deep storage tanks and tunnels, deep storage tunnels and surface tanks, it gets less attractive very rapidly. So we're looking at alternatives. Green infrastructure is a way to do it, and this, when I mentioned earlier that our infrastructure is invisible, it's no longer going to be the case, and people are going to understand what it takes to keep the city clean and green. Includes things like green roofs. This is on the Bronx Courthouse. Blue roofs, which are just without vegetation, but they store it in these very inexpensive pans, essentially filled with ballast with holes drilled in them. Very simple technology and very cost effective. This might add $1 per square foot to construction costs, running about $400 a square foot now in New York City. Bioswales in the public right of way, which are basically fancy tree pits with some storage underneath. And porous pavement, which we think has a lot of promise. There's a lot of paved surfaces. Well, we compared, a few years ago, we published the New York City Green Infrastructure Plan, and we looked at the green versus the gray strategy. We have to, like all good planners, estimate what the future impact will be. And we thought all told, in combination with, look at that box in blue, reduced flows, very important. People talk about conservation as beneficial for supply and energy use, but also less water, less base flow through the system helps us deal with storms easier. Some optimization and green infrastructure, we can get to a better place than if we built a few tanks and tunnels that were under consideration. Here's a number I like, it costs less. So you can see the public investment, what we spent already and are committed to spend is about $2.9 billion. If we add on another $1.5 billion in green infrastructure, investing in those green roofs and bioswales, which we've committed to do, and the private sector kicks in nearly $1 billion, $900 million under new development regulations, which we've adopted in July of last year. The total investment will be about $5.3 billion. That's saving at least $1.5 billion compared to the alternative. So we think that's very important. Right now, and we actually had a meeting last night, we're going through and developing really our second iteration of long-term control plans. Our first sort of baby long-term control plans were facility plans, and that led to that $2.9 billion in initial investments. Here we are in the Bronx looking at how do we, on a landscape basis, develop partnerships with New York City Housing Authority, parks, public schools, planned right-of-way areas, and model those benefits and take advantage of it. So we are very much in the nitty-gritty. We're developing 11 of these plans over the next 5 years. It's very simple, and here's, this is the, in a decentralized infrastructure, the key is scaling up rapidly. And this is what we're doing. We're going to build thousands of these bioswales, probably all told at the 10 to 20,000. And it seems like a big number, but it's not impossible. We currently maintain 148,000 catch basins in New York City. We also maintain 110,000 nearly fire hydrants in New York City. So we're used to building decentralized and maintaining decentralized systems. Of course, it takes time, and that's what we work with our regulators to do, but we're ramping up quickly. By 2013, in this calendar year, we're going to have several hundred of these, throughout the city. By 2015, we're going to have 6,000. So you can see the water flows in, seeps, is stored there, doesn't get to the sewer system. This is where we're going to, you can see, by the way, this as a result of some of our pilot studies, the axis on the bottom is the total precipitation. Most of our storms are less than 1 inch, and our bioswale can handle 80 to 100% of that. This is where we're going to build it. We have to take an area-wide approach. We have a number of different delivery mechanisms with our city partners, but in the interest of time, I won't spend time on it. But at the end of the day, this is what you can get. And this is one, we're very excited about the opportunity to leverage dollars. In our grant program, which is now in its 3rd year, we are leveraging private dollars. This is the rooftop of a company called Brooklyn Grange, which is a commercial property. They kicked in $600,000. We spent $300,000. And I'm sorry, the reverse. They spent $300,000. We spent $600,000. And it's the largest, one of the largest green roofs in the city, and it's used to sell locally sourced, grow and sell locally sourced crops. It's very important. Another big partnership that we're very proud of is our schoolyards playgrounds program with a Trust for Public Land, one of many nonprofits that we work for. Here's the before version, and here's the after version of a first-generation schoolyards and playgrounds program. We're very excited to subsidize this to the extent that it captures water. Again, here's another image of before and afterwards. And I think what this illustrates is the promise of green infrastructure as a way to clean up the water systems, because there's many benefits, and that allows you to add the water stream of money to the school stream of money to the local redevelopment stream of money, combine those so that you have a multi-purpose facility. So that's part of our multi-pronged effort to build a greener, more sustainable city for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.